First, I should explain that normally, this isn't our normal study meeting. We've been out of town, and it just so happens that we're going to end up being out of town again this Wednesday. So my wife decided that it was probably a good idea that I do this. I've never tried this before where I'm actually looking at the camera more than I'm looking at people around the table, because there's really not, everybody's not around the table. There are a couple of people here. So I don't know how this is going to work, but we'll try. And if it works, then maybe we can expand into some other things we could read at the same time in parallel to what we're reading now. But at any rate, we ended last time on page 193 of The Heart of the Lotus Sutra by Daisaku Ikeda. And the preceding page on page 192 is really talking about the literal text of the lifespan chapter and Shakyamuni's pronouncements about how he tries to save people. And he says basically at the top of page 192, if there are living beings who come to me, indicates the desire to seek. It describes a condition where people aspire to account and possess a seeking mind for the Buddha who attained enlightenment in the remote past. He says, I employ my Buddha eye to observe whether their faith and other faculties are keen or dull. Describes the response of the Buddha who attained enlightenment, numberless major world system, dust particle, kalpas ago. In response to people seeking minds, the Buddha who attained enlightenment in the remote past appears in the world as various Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The Buddha's appearance is motivated by compassion. Deep in their lives, those experiencing pain and suffering seek Buddhism. They aspire to encounter the Buddha. The Buddha, due to his power of compassion, hears their unvoiced cries and yearns to help them. And he responds by appearing in the world to lead all people to happiness. This is the mystic principle of responsive communion. Now, again, as I mentioned the last time we read this concept of responsive communion is the basis for all Buddhas to make their appearance. Okay, all Buddhas come forth into the Sahe world for the purpose of making people equal to themselves. Okay? For the purpose of helping others discover the enlightened Buddhahood that already exists in their life is actually already their fundamental identity. Okay? So he says to act in response to seeing someone suffering is to manifest the compassion of a Buddha. Because, again, the purpose of what we do is not to show others that we know more than them or that we're correct and they're incorrect. The entire function of our faith and practice is to instill in ourselves the truth that we are the Buddha exactly as we are, and to help others also come to that understanding through the course of observing our own life, if nothing else. He says this spirit of compassion, this spirit to sympathize with other sufferings, underlies the practice of the SGI. So once again, being concerned about others other than just ourselves is the basic basis of being a bodhisattva. And being a bodhisattva of the earth, we're the gathering of the ceremony there that has never ceased to continue. So he's saying, precisely because we base ourselves on such a spirit of compassion, earnestness is born, wisdom wells forth, ideas are quickly translated into action, and there is development. We absolutely must never forget this. So when President Ikeda says, we must never forget this, let's reread it again. He says, to act in response to seeing someone suffering is to manifest the compassion of the Buddha. That means that's when you are the Buddha. If you see someone suffering and you have no sense of compassion toward them, probably you don't have your 10th world activated, okay? He's saying this spirit of compassion is the underlying practice of the SGI, because what we're constantly doing as SGI members is trying to awaken people to a practice of faith in the Gohonzon, right? Yes. Which is the basis of them to awaken that same aspect in their own life. He's saying precisely because we base ourselves on such a spirit of compassion, because of that compassion, what gives rise to wisdom?
Compassion.
Compassion. It's not the other way around. We don't become wise and then from that wisdom we develop compassion. It's through compassion we develop wisdom. So what he's saying is that the first step is to have this development of compassion in your life so that you're not viewing life strictly from the single lens of your own self. Okay, what's good for me, what I want, what's good for me, what I want. Okay, because the actual Buddha, the Buddha nature perceives everything as being connected. So there's no separation between you and everything else. You it can never be just about you. There's no such thing as just about you. That doesn't exist. That's delusion. Okay? But it takes a long time for us to be able to ascertain that as the truth, rather than some sort of theoretical construct of what people say is the basis of everything. So he's saying that precisely, he uses this word in this translation, precisely because we base ourselves on such a spirit of compassion. In other words, it's due to the compassion that we're able to have earnestness, that wisdom wells forth, and that ideas are quickly translated into action. If we only view these things as theoretical prognostications of doctrine, rather than incorporating them into the actual functioning of our life, if we don't take action, they're still theoretical. All right? So again, it's the compassion that creates everything that drives us from being a Buddha in theory to a Buddha in reality. He's saying we must absolutely never forget this. Why? Because that is the recipe for the life condition of the 10th world in the midst of the 9 that we exist in. He says, President Toda once said, people aspire for the Buddha and desire an outstanding leader, and in response, the Buddha appears. This means you. It means you. It means each one of us that are the Buddha. Okay? This isn't about a Buddha named Nichiren or a Buddha named Shakyamuni or a Buddha named Daisaku Ikeda. This is about every Buddha. Every individual is the Buddha. Therefore, he's talking about each one of us in the truest sense of our identity. He's saying, we may encounter stalemates in life and society as a civilization. Possessing a philosophy offering profound insight into life enables one to open the way forward through such deadlocks. It's through our own experience that we gain the capacity to be able to help others. In an age lacking philosophy, people's hearts wander and drift. Something seems wrong. This is quotation. Something seems wrong with how things are, but I don't know what to do, people say to themselves. I want to become happy, but I don't know what real happiness is. Broadly speaking, these unvoiced cries represent people's aspiration and their call for the Buddha for help. Following the example of the Buddha, let us stand up in response to people's cries and generate a current of dialogue for truth and justice. Now, he's saying following the example of the Buddha, but in truth, we are the Buddha. Okay? So he kind of like takes us down a notch so that you're not having to be somebody that already perceives yourself in the 10th world. Okay? You can aspire. This is still the Bodhisattva practice, right? That's what Buddhahood comes from. Mm-hmm. Compassion is the Bodhisattva practice, right? He's just said compassion is the source of everything that we just discussed. Mm-hmm. All right? Now, going on to the next byline, then he says on page 193, continuing, this is new reading on our part here. All right? Buddhas yearn to share their benefits with others. Because why did we just discuss that Buddhas make their advent? Each Buddha makes their advent for what purpose?
Compassion.
But for what purpose? To make everyone equal to themselves. To make sure everybody else realizes they are also the Buddha. Yes. Okay? So Buddhas yearn to share their benefits with others. What benefits is he talking about, though? Is he talking about my new car? The job I just got? The great boyfriend I just snagged?
What does it mean, yearn?
Yearn means to desire with a sense of longing. Uh-huh. Okay? Do you understand? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I yearn to become, I desire strongly to be able to accomplish something. Mm-hmm. I yearn for it. Mm-hmm. You know, you might yearn for your boyfriend, yearn for your loved one. Okay? He says, going to the text on page 193, Shakyamuni then details how he, as the Buddha who attained enlightenment in the remote past, has appeared in order to lead those seeking Buddhism to enlightenment. Again, we're talking about Shakyamuni's declaration, the literal text of the 16th chapter, not the implicit part, which we'll get to in a minute. He says, Shakyamuni then details how he, as the Buddha who attained enlightenment in the remote past, has appeared in order to lead those seeking Buddhism to enlightenment. He's talking about this in the lifespan chapter, because now for the first time, after 40 years, he's saying, no, I didn't attain enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. I attained enlightenment not just major world system dust particle kalpas ago. I attained enlightenment numberless major world system dust particle kalpas ago. Okay, he's just blown the lid off of everything he said for 40 years up until now in the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra. He says, first he says that he uses his Buddha eye to determine whether their faculties are keen or dull, and so gauges how it might be possible to lead them to enlightenment. And on that basis, Shakyamuni explains that he has appeared as various Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of different names and different lifespans. If you read the Lotus Sutra, you will see it mentioned many different Buddhas preaching the Lotus Sutra, and all of them having prescribed lifespans that pertain to their correct law, their counterfeit law, and the latter day of their law. Okay? He also says that at times he has announced that he would enter nirvana and then seem to do so, as some of these identities in provisional teachings. Okay? The truth is that the life of the Buddha who attained enlightenment in the remote past is eternal. But to guide people, he has, as an expedient means, as a means to get them to be able to have the capacity to perceive the truth, as an expedient means, he's appeared under a variety of names and assumed various limited lifespans and then pretended to enter nirvana, as he described in the provisional teachings. Are you following?
Okay.
Everybody's with me, right? Yeah? Okay, she's reading ahead. The Buddhas, plural, and Bodhisattvas of the past, as emanations of Shakyamuni, who attained enlightenment in the remote past, appeared in order to guide people toward enlightenment on the basis of provisional teachings. Okay? To bring them forward, to bring them closer so that they could encounter the Lotus Sutra, the true teaching. Don't forget, the Lotus Sutra is the teaching where we've replaced the three vehicles with the one vehicle. We've gone from thinking that we needed to be in learning, realization, or bodhisattva to be the Buddha, to realize that we are. Okay? The Buddha and Bodhisattvas of the past, as emanations of Shakyamuni who attained enlightenment in the remote past, appeared in order to guide people toward enlightenment. The Buddha thus freely shares his eternal life with his various emanations to teach and guide the people. Eternal life is the Buddha's immeasurable benefit, Tentai says. Juryo, or lifespan, refers to an overall reckoning. It indicates an overall reckoning of the benefits of the two Buddhas, the three Buddhas, and all the Buddhas of the 10 directions and the three existences. Okay, and that's from the first point 1 of chapter 16 of the OTT. He says, allowing his lifespan to be fully consumed in the process, Shakyamuni bestowed his benefit upon people in countless places and ages. Now, do you understand what he's saying there? Allowing his lifespan to be consumed in the process. He's saying that even though he had this limitless lifespan, he never utilized that lifespan for any other purpose than to propagate the law. He didn't decide to take a lifetime to be a rock star or, a king or something like that. It was really, everything was always predicated on professing the truth or making the path for that to be able to achieve, because that's the purpose of all the provisional teachings. They're expedient means, right? So he's saying, for the Buddha to save people means for him to share his immense life force, his lifespan, with others. Fundamentally, the Buddha's benefit is life force. It is the power to thrive. Okay? That's the same thing for us. Right? What is it that we're able to, what is our actual benefit from chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo to the Gohonzon? It's bringing forth the life force, the life condition of the 10th world. Right? Even though we still exist in the 9. Right? Is to bring out the understanding that the 10th is never outside of us or away from us, that it's always a part of those 9 and that can be called forth at any moment. Okay? So he's saying, so it's the power to thrive, because that's what the power to thrive is. That's understanding the truth. That's what gives you the power to thrive, right? right? So he's saying in the lifespan chapter, Shakyamuni clarifies that the Buddha's lifespan is in fact immeasurable. All right? Each day we receive this immeasurable life force, this immeasurable benefit from the Gohonzon, because all the benefits of all the practices and all of the resulting good fortune of all the Buddhas throughout the three existences is shared by all Buddhas. Okay? So the minute that we tap into that by chanting Daimoku to the correct object of devotion, we gain not only the merit of our own actions, but we share in the merit of all the actions of the countless teachers of the same law. This is the teaching of the Daishonin. I can show you in the Gosho where it says that. You know, right? Because
mutual
we've already
possession.
read it. Right. Pardon?
Like mutual possession.
Well, like mutual possession, but the point is that the Daishonin's teaching is that why can you chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo and suddenly have such great power and influence? Because all of the practices and the benefits contained therein of Shakyamuni Buddha and all of the other Buddhas throughout the three existences are all contained within Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Okay? That's where all of this instantaneous connection comes from. There is no separation between all those Buddhas and you. You're the Buddha too, right? So are the people that are not yet awakened to the truth. They're also the Buddha. They're just Buddhas in theories because they haven't awakened their Buddha nature. But that potentiality, that life essence, still, that original state still exists in everyone and everything. It's not something acquired. Okay? It's not something developed. Okay? It's actually the original state of your existence that you have distorted and become deluded toward and no longer perceive. All right? That's why you can instantaneously call it forth rather than having to acquire it in some fashion through some action, some qualifying issue.
Then I have a practical question.
Sure, that's what this is whole...
about that, because it was like we had in Germany the question that okay, for some of the people it is really hard for them to see the Buddhahood in other people, because they were asking, what about murderers, killers,
Sure,
and all these people in jail? They were asking, someone was asking, it is really hard for me to see in those people the Buddhahood.
right.
So, I mean, there was not a real answer to it.
Well, I can give you an answer.
Yeah.
I can give you an answer. Maybe, I don't know why you weren't able to get one, but I can give you an answer.
Yeah.
Okay? If we go back, if we precede even the teachings of Nichiren, we go all the way back to Shakyamuni, okay? And you know that he had a disciple named Shariputra, right?
Pardon me?
Shariputra, do you know that he had a voice hearer? He was like the most wise disciple that he had with Shariputra.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's a story about the Brahmin that Shariputra met, and the Brahmin said, and Shariputra said, I'll do anything to help you find the way. And the Brahmin said, give me your eyeball. Okay, and so the story goes that Shariputra actually literally gouged his eye out and presented it to the guy as some great gift of, his emancipation, his willingness to do anything to help somebody find the way. And the guy threw it on the ground and stepped on it. Okay, and why did Shakyamuni says that action of Shariputra becoming disgusted at the fact that this person would have asked for his eyeball and then stepped on it, and that this person couldn't possibly have a Buddha nature, that set Shariputra back in the process of discovering his Buddha nature by many, many, many millennia. Okay? And that was the whole point, was that to destroy that sense of perception of all others being equal to oneself and having the Buddha nature is a very difficult thing to do. And if you're only looking at this from a perspective of the theoretical aspect, it will be continuing to be a difficult thing. But the Daishonin qualifies, and I don't know which exact Gosho it is. I have to go to the Metadex to put the quote in, and then I can tell you what Gosho it's in. But the Daishonin qualifies on several occasions, more than one Gosho. He discusses the truth and the reality that even a thief, even a criminal, loves his wife and his children. Okay? So that if you're looking at a murderer, or you're looking at somebody that's as an objectionable person, let's say pull somebody from history, Hitler, or somebody else that's done historically diabolical things. Buddhism would say that they still all have the Buddha nature, that they are still all Buddhas theoretically, but they've obscured that aspect through their own actions. They've created such a karmic impediment that cannot become something that they easily rectify and escape. For those of us that are pursuing this practice, when they talk about it's difficult to see someone else's Buddhahood, then they don't perceive Buddhahood correctly from the perspective of what Buddhahood is. Because Buddhahood is not necessarily about a person's actions as much as it is their original state, their original identity. If you can't perceive the Buddhahood in Hitler, then you don't perceive the capacity for Buddhahood to exist in all things. Because you're already creating an exclusion. And what are you creating that exclusion based on? Murder. Okay? Okay, wow. Somebody took somebody else's life. Let's go now to the Nirvana Sutra. And again, I bring this out all the time. Shakyamuni quotes in the Nirvana Sutra, says, when I was once the king of such and such a place, and I encountered the Brahmin slanderers slandering the law, you know what I did to them? I killed every one of them. And he says, you know what kind of bad karma I got from doing that?
Nothing.
None. Okay? So you have to understand that, first of all, what is the basis of Buddhism? Is it Western philosophy and Christian perceptions of right and wrong? No. Buddhism says that's called the topsy-turvy perception of right and wrong based on the delusion of the 9 worlds. Okay? Because the only true thing, I mean, there's according to Buddhism, there's different levels of murder, of killing. Okay? You can when you're on the battlefield defending your country, or your homestead in the middle of being attacked by, raiders or something like that, and you take a life. Is that, you're a murderer then, right? No, we create differentiations to say, no, that's self-defense. No, that's the whole point. It's always predicated on these nuances. It's never black and white. Okay? It's never like, those are the bad people and these are the good people. Okay? Because first of all, what you're fixating on is a single lifetime. Now, Buddhism is saying that life is eternal in both directions. So these people, have they been murderers in every lifetime? Probably not. Probably not. Okay? And what's the probability that they would be murderers in every single lifetime for all eternity? At some point in time, they had to create a karmic influence that took them along that path that they possibly haven't escaped. Or it could be that they've expiated that in this lifetime. They got caught, they got nailed, they went to prison for life, whatever. Some people give their lives for the sake, for the fact that they murder. Some people murder and never get caught. Okay? So you don't know. You could be talking to somebody that you think, I can see your Buddha nature, but they could be a murderer. Okay? So it's really not about your perception. It's about what is the truth. Okay? Your ability to perceive the truth is what determines you to be the Buddha. If you cannot see the Buddha nature in other people, then you can't really see it in yourself. You see it only theoretically in yourself. Because you only see it theoretically in others. You don't see it as their fundamental baseline identity. Their original state. Their original state is Buddhahood. It's not something that I have to worry about. It's not based on their actions. Shakyamuni's talking about he killed a bunch of Brahmins and got no bad karma for it. Why would he put that in a sutra? To clarify to you. It's not about this isn't all little black and white stuff you can put in a box. It's like I use the analogy quite often. It's analog, it's not digital. It's gray, it's not black and white. Okay? Because each one of us, if we judge another person's life, you're a murderer. I'm talking about a single moment in a single lifetime. Based on the span of existence that's eternal in both directions, that's a very narrow perception. Should my life be judged in any individual moment? No. Why? Because my life continues. I can change from anybody into anything, both ways, in either direction. That's why What is a bodhisattva of the earth? What's the determination of a bodhisattva of the earth? Somebody that maintains faith to the last moment of their life. So who qualifies as a bodhisattva of the earth? Just because you chanted Nam Myoho Renge Kyo? Sorry, they're not according to Nichiren. That doesn't make you a bodhisattva of the earth. You're not automatically a bodhisattva of the earth. Bodhisattvas of the earth always, in every lifetime, maintain faith to the last moment of their life. Mm-hmm. You can't really know, did I function in this lifetime as a bodhisattva of the earth, until you've actually lived this whole life. Because I can show you lots of Soka Gakkai leaders that are no longer members of the Soka Gakkai and don't chant anymore. Mm-hmm. Leadership didn't give them lifetime faith, didn't grant them some sort of magic wand, made them impervious to the devil of the sixth heaven that discouraged them and made them take a different path. Mm-hmm. Okay? So when we view things, you have to, if people say they can't see the beauty in the imperfection of others, then they're not expressing the compassion of the bodhisattva even, let alone the Buddha. So when they talk about themselves being Buddha, they're still talking about themselves being Buddha theoretically. It's based on some sort of a phenomenon of perfection. I attained this level of purity. Okay? That's what makes me the Buddha. That's bullshit. That has nothing to do with being the Buddha. What has to do with being the Buddha is what he's talking about here that has to do with the Buddha, being the Buddha. Does he talk about changing your underwear every day and living a certain way and taking... No. He's talking about protecting the law. Primarily and only, strictly, that's what this pertains to. This doesn't pertain to secular life, what you do for a living or what your past is.
Also, I mean, when we had this question, there was also one of the answer, or one of the members said, oh, maybe this person has such a deep fundamental darkness, so that's why it's so hard, I mean, for us, or to see his Buddhahood, because his fundamental darkness is so deep.
The only fundamental darkness that you ever see is your own. When you see him as not the Buddha, that's your fundamental darkness. That's not his fundamental darkness that has obscured his Buddhahood to you. No, that's your delusion cutting you off from the truth, that all people are equal. All people are already Buddhas. If you don't perceive it, that's your problem. That's not their problem. Okay? So that answer is not correct either. There's nobody else's fundamental darkness that affects us. Our fundamental darkness affects us. What is fundamental darkness? Is it dark? Does it have a color? No. What is fundamental darkness? Do you know what fundamental darkness is? It's the devil of the sixth heaven. It's delusion, you could say that generally, but that's not really in its precise definition. Fundamental darkness is our inability to perceive our own Buddha nature and the Buddha nature in all others. So whose fundamental darkness is it when you can't see them as the Buddha? It is your own. 100% of the time. Even a thief loves his wife and children. Hi, guys.
Hi, Wednesday.
Huh? No, it's not Wednesday. But we're doing it anyhow because we're going to be gone Wednesday. Hey, dudes. Everybody knows Shufan, right? From long ago. She's been in Germany all this time. They just got back from cram school, so sorry. All right, so does that help you understand a little more clearly what I'm trying to say here and what actually President Ikeda is saying? This is not Tom saying this. This is Daisaku Ikeda saying it. Why is Daisaku Ikeda saying it? Because this is what Nichiren says. Okay? So while people take it upon themselves to think they have latitudes of interpretation, in truth they do not. Because it is actually already all spelled out. But if you didn't ever read all of this, you would never know it's already all spelled out. And you would be subjected to thinking you have the ability to just inject your little opinions when your opinions can be leading people into misconceptions that are absolutely incorrect. You could be thinking fundamental darkness is something you can see in somebody else and never understand that every time you see fundamental darkness that way, you're very fundamentally dark. Okay? So that's what we try to avoid here. That's really the purpose of me reading this and then having this conversation. and screw me if I'm wrong. But I'm not. So, you understand? Where was I? Each day we receive this immeasurable, I'll just start here. Each day we receive this immeasurable life force, this immeasurable benefit from the Gohonzon, again, because it's shared between all Buddhas. Therefore, and that's not me saying that, that's Daisaku Ikeda saying that. Realize that, again, the position I'm taking here is not mine. This is the teaching of Buddhism, that all Buddhas share in the same benefit. All right? Therefore, the more we praise the great beneficial power of the Gohonzon, the more our own lives increase in majesty and power and shine with brilliance. Now, what does that mean? Because that, when you see me put orange on here, it's because I went, whoa, okay, I got to explain this, because this is a lot deeper than what it seems like in this sentence. He says, each day we receive this immeasurable life force, this immeasurable benefit from the Gohonzon. Therefore, the more we praise the great beneficial power of the Gohonzon, the more our own lives increase in majesty and power and shine with brilliance. Now, that is a fact that I can tell you from my own experience exists. The more you praise the law, the more benefit you get. It's very simple. The more you share what you're experiencing to the best of your ability through the proper lens and the proper perspective of understanding the teaching, because you've taken the action to understand the teaching, the more benefit you gain from that. The more you're rewarded for that. That's completely logical, right? Okay? So that's what he's encouraging everybody here. He's saying, do this as much as you can, because there's merit in doing so. Praising the law is a way to receive benefit. It's the same as chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo.
I also felt that the more we understand, the more benefits come.
Of course! Because you're understanding what is correct thinking in front of the Gohonzon. You're not freelancing. You understand what the teaching is. Follow? All right. So, he says, with faith in the Gohonzon as the foundation, and what did he qualify the rest of the sentence under? Faith. First, this is what actualizes the influence and the power of the 10th world in our life, which reside in the 9 worlds on a basis of existence. Okay? We can only find the 10th world in the 9 worlds. There's no such place as a 10th world that you can go to. You follow? And there's no such state of perfection as the 10th world. We're just 10th world. We're white. We're gods. Okay? No, we live in the Sahe world. We experience and undergo the same challenges as the people we're trying to make equal to us. If we didn't, they would immediately separate us into a different category of individual. They're not like us. They couldn't be like us. So, since we know in advance with our Buddha wisdom that that's going to be an obstacle for us to be able to convey to them the truth, we assume their level of identity. We live in this Sahe world. We go through the topsy-turvy process of refining our wisdom so that we can lead others to what the truth is. Okay? We overcome those issues of delusion through taking action, by having our teachers teach us. All right? That's what's happening here. This is our teacher teaching us. With faith in the Gohonzon as the foundation, we pray, take action, and speak out for the happiness of others. Now, what does that mean? Speak out for the happiness of others. We speak out not only about our own experiences, but we also speak out for those that we see having evil done to them. We don't just stand by and idly let bad things happen to other people. We have great compassion. We take efforts for others. We're strong, we're brave, we're Buddhists. We're not afraid of anything. All right? The maintenance of this correct rhythm directs one's entire being towards longevity, health, and happiness. To explain this rhythm of faith, which obviously Daisaku Ikeda has mastered, considering his physical, condition when he first started practicing and the fact that he's still kicking. To explain this rhythm of faith manifesting itself in daily life in practical terms, I once proposed the following 4 guidelines for leading a healthy life. 1. Do an invigorating daily gongyo. Conduct your daily life in a reasonable and productive manner. 3. Be of service to others. And 4. Maintain sound eating habits. Now that sounds like kind of mundane, like what? What kind of a laundry list is that?
A sound eating?
Yep.
Like really
Sound eating habits. No. Sound eating habits means stay away from a lot of oils and
okay.
hydrogenated things that are bad for your,
Okay.
Sound eating habit means eat wisely. Eat, with your longevity in mind.
Okay.
Use your Buddha wisdom. I mean, don't assume I chant, so I'm going to live to be 110. Okay. I can do anything I want. I don't have, I'm impervious because I'm the Buddha, I chant. No. These are all basic, fundamental, common sense things. He's saying utilize them as a basis for trying to extend this process of practice and faith. He says, it might also be said that faith in the mystic law is the foremost catalyst of health and longevity. All right? Now, faith of valiant action produces great joy. Bottom of page 194. You can see how quickly we actually get through this with me talking so much. All right. Faith of valiant action produces great joy. Let us now interpret the implicit meaning of this passage. Now, what is he saying when he says that? Now let us interpret the implicit meaning of this passage. Because what he's done in this book is he's explained, all right, that there's 3 perceptions that one can that can occur in encountering the Lotus Sutra in the Sahe world. You could be a person that was somebody from the former day of the law, the middle day of the law, or the latter day of the law. And it's different for each karmic group of individuals because there are no bodhisattvas of the earth that appear in the middle or the former day. Only in the latter day. Why? Because the law of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo hasn't been revealed to the So you can't be a bodhisattva of the earth unless you can embrace Nam-myoho Renge-kyo as the teaching that you're going to propagate to everyone else, right? So what he's basically saying then, the implicit meaning then is reading the Lotus Sutra from the perspective of Nichiren rather than from the perspective of Shakyamuni, which is to interpret and understand the Buddhism of the sowing versus the Buddhism of the harvest. Okay? They're 2 completely different perspectives, 2 completely different teachings. Okay? The Buddhism of the sowing is Shakyamuni, or the Buddhism of the sowing is Nichiren's teaching, and the Buddhism of the harvest is Shakyamuni's. Even though they're the same teaching. They don't occur at the same time, and they don't occur from the same teacher. Okay? One's for people that are not original disciples of the Buddha in his true identity. Those people manifest in the latter day of the law. Okay? So he's saying, let us now interpret the implicit meaning of the passage, or the meaning of this passage in light of the Daishonen's Buddhism. First, if there are living beings who come to me, as it says in the 16th chapter of the Lotus Sutra, refers to our sitting upright before the Gohonzon, which you would not read from reading the Lotus Sutra. Okay, because there's no mention of the Gohonzon in the Lotus Sutra. You follow? Okay? So he's saying that's what that really means. If there are living beings who come to me, refers to our sitting in front of the object of devotion. Okay, the manifestation of the eternal life of the Buddha of beginningless time. In the latter day of the law, the Buddha's plural act of employing, that's not plural, possessive. In the latter day of the law, the Buddha's act of employing the Buddha I to observe people's capacity and preaching the law in accordance with their circumstances indicates Nichiren's compassionate conduct in leading all people to enlightenment. So he's saying, literally a minute ago, I told you what Shakyamuni was saying, and I read this back for you. Shakyamuni says, I look at them and I perceive their capacity, and then I say whatever's going to work for them. He's now saying in the latter day of the law, we're now going to view that from the perspective of Nichiren, and that is not going to be, I'm going to perceive their capacity and give them expedient means, because we don't give expedient means. Right? We teach the truth. Right? So he's saying, In the latter day of the law, the Buddha's act of employing the Buddha eye to observe people's capacity in preaching the law in accordance with their circumstances indicates Nichiren's compassionate conduct in leading all people to enlightenment. Now, what was Nichiren's compassionate conduct in leading all people to enlightenment? What was Nichiren's conduct?
Propagate Nam-myoho Renge Kyo.
Not only that, refutation. He refuted incorrect teachings.
Okay.
Right. I mean, again, what is his compassion? His compassion is to say, don't do that. It's not to say, it's okay. I can't, it's not to go along with it. It's to oppose it. He didn't say, if you agree with me, he's saying, if you don't agree with me, you're wrong. Do you follow? That's his compassion, to explicitly say, this is incorrect, don't go there. All right? In the latter day of the law, I'll continue here, I'll read the whole thing together. In the latter day of the law, the Buddha's act of employing the Buddha eye to observe people's capacity and preaching the law in accordance with their circumstances indicates Nichiren's compassionate conduct in leading all people to enlightenment. President Toda explained this passage as meaning that the Gohonzon perceives our faith and bestows upon us great compassion. From our standpoint, if their faculties are keen or dull, could be said to indicate the strength or weakness of our faith. The deeper our faith becomes, the more we can manifest the immeasurable benefit of the Gohonzon. In a lecture, President Toda said, and I've qualified this to the group many times, when President Ikeda, if you read enough of this, you'll notice when he goes into quoting President Toda and when he doesn't. And when he goes into quoting President Toda, it's quite often when he's expressing a truth that was never really perceived or understood before President Toda came along and perceived it and clarified it. Okay? So there's no historical foundation for this incorporation of Nichiren's teaching, because it actually occurred with Makaguchi and Toda and the lay people taking back the influence and the power of the Daishonin's teaching from the priesthood. Okay? And turning it into something that's based on the equality of all people, not the hierarchy of the priesthood and the laity. All right? So he quotes President Toda whenever he says, this is how I was raised. This is what my faith is based on. Take my word for it because my teacher taught me this. That's what he's saying. Before the Daishonin entered nirvana, this President Toda is saying, he left the Gohonzon for us, the people of the latter day. While he was alive, he was respectfully called Nichiren Daishonin. After his passing, he is reverently called the Gohonzon bestowed upon all humankind. This is the meaning of preach to them under different names and describe my lifespan as long or short. This Gohonzon is the true aspect of the Buddha. All right? Now, when President Toda says that, though, you must also understand that he's talking about you at the same time he's saying what he's saying here. There is no separation between you and Nichiren. Nichiren isn't a different kind of human being than you. Okay? He is exactly the same kind of human being as you. That's why you can have exactly the same benefit, the same wisdom, the same life, the same state of life. That's why you are the Buddha. Okay? That's why you can be the Buddha. So when he talks about Buddha here, he's not talking about something different than your life. Mm-hmm. Do you follow? Mm-hmm. That's a very important part of this to perceive. Mm-hmm. That it's not talking about some guys that are greater than us. Mm-hmm. This is what we really are. This is what we should perceive ourselves as being. This is what we should have our eye on the ball to become. The way to be. The way to behave and the way to perceive ourselves. Mm-hmm. When he's talking about the Buddha, every time he talks about the Buddha, as far as I'm concerned, he's talking about me. Mm-hmm. Okay? Yes, I know he's talking about the Daishonin. Do I match the Daishonin in terms of merit on any level? No. But I do from the perspective of the essence of my life. Mm. There is no difference between me and Nichiren or Daisaku Ikeda as it relates to the essence of my life. Mm. I am eternally endowed with the three bodies.
I have some questions.
Sure.
Because we have two, like, they are not yet members, but in our group they just started to chant, and one already, it's the husband of our group leader, and he's already chanting with us for 1 year, but he's refusing, like, and I also like talking about that, okay, the more, I mean, the Gohonzon is not a paper, you really need to chant with faith. But I mean, for him, is really like to believe that this paper, well, because he just started, he cannot, I mean...
He doesn't have to. As a matter of fact, the level of perception and understanding that I'm discussing with you is not something you would ever start to try and teach to somebody that's just beginning. You know, you've been practicing for years. I've known you for years. I feel comfortable enough in our relationship that I don't worry that I'm going to say something here you're not going to ask me to clarify. Okay? But you would, this is not beginner's material. You know, beginner's material would be, here, read the book. Tell me what you got out of it. Leave it at that. To go into the depth of what each of these things is talking about, really, why? He's not going to be able to perceive it. He's not there yet. Okay? So what he needs to do is just chant and get benefit. He doesn't have to believe anything about the Gohonzon. Just the very fact that he's chanting to the Gohonzon is great faith. It's great faith. He's got no reason to do it other than faith. He doesn't perceive it as faith. He may even perceive it as doubt.
No, he doesn't perceive. He says, "Yeah,
yeah, it's okay." But the truth is, what are you really doing, guy? What are you really doing? What you're really doing is you're sitting in front of the Gohonzon and you're still doing this, even though you're feeling these feelings. Wow, is that faith? That's the greatest faith. That's why so many incredible miracles can occur when you first start practicing, because just to sit down in front of the Gohonzon with even this much faith or belief or understanding for even a moment assures you of Buddhahood. That's how powerful it is. Okay? That's what establishes an indestructible tie that will follow you every lifetime. You can't get away from it. You will eventually attain 10th world Anantara Samyak Sambodhai in an existence in the future, period. It's impossible for that to be denied to you once you go from being a Buddha in theory to going to hearing the names and the words, hearing the name and the words of the truth, which is the second stage of the 6 stages of practice, which is where he's at right now. Okay? And actually, he's a little bit further than that, because he's already started chanting to the Gohonzon and doing Gongyo, I would assume, and he's attending activities. So he's on the front end of the lifelong. Again, this is not something that goes for a year, 5 years, 10 years. It goes to the last moment of your life. So it doesn't matter when you start. It matters when you end. That's it. It ends the same time for everybody. You can start any time prior to that. It ends at the last moment of our life. Each one of us. Okay? The starting point, you can start practicing. You could be a fortune baby like my kids have been chanting since before they could talk. You know, who already can perceive themselves as being the Buddha. Ask any one of my children anything about they're the Buddha. Why? Because that's exactly what they believe. That's what they've been taught since they were little kids. You know, it depends on your karma. You know, so as he struggles to find his way, the most important thing is not for him to perceive all of this other deep stuff that's really theoretical in its context from the perspective of what its impact on you is. Why do I need to know this? So that I can explain it to you. Why do you need to know it? So you can explain it to somebody. Other than that, why did you need to know it? I didn't need to know it for me. I needed to know it for you. That's why I learned it. I was already getting plenty of benefit on my own. This is me repaying. Me doing all this work is me repaying the Gohonzon for. It's my sense of gratitude. My debt of gratitude. It's not because I needed to dispel some concern about validity here. Do you understand? So for him, go for it. You know, it's not necessary that he have this locked-in sense of belief. As a matter of fact, we don't want that kind of belief. You don't want anybody to have like an artificial, you know, like Christian kind of belief where they're said, you know, you must have faith first. No, you don't have faith first. The fact that you're doing it is faith first. That's all the faith you need. It's the result that faith manifests in actuality that becomes the cornerstone to your life and your practice and what drives you to read more, to understand more, to trust more. This is a process. That's it. You can't judge faith. Faith is not about some artificial bullshit level of purity. There is no such thing as, or should say, there's no such thing as impurity. That's what I can say. OTT. No such thing as impurity. What is this teaching? What does this book say about each chapter of the first 9 chapters of each one's qualifying each of the 9 worlds? Clean and pure. Clean and pure. Clean and pure. Clean and pure. What is the treasure tower? It's the actual birth canal of a female. I mean, it gets into some really cool stuff. So if you're looking for clean and pure and pristine, it's not even in the OTT. It gets pretty basic when he talks about stuff and what it really means, what it represents, what it's really symbolic of. It's not antiseptic in any way, shape, or form. How could it be if it's the true teaching? If it's the true teaching, it's got to encompass everything, not just the good stuff. It's got to encompass the bad stuff as well. Or it's not complete. Do you understand? And that's what Nichiren says. That's why it's got to be where good and bad are one and the same. They're both derived from the same influence. They're just two sides of the same coin. Delusion and enlightenment. That's all it is. Correct and incorrect. Not really different, just capacity to perceive the truth. All right?
Okay.
So the Gohonzon is the true aspect of the Buddha. What's that say? The Gohonzon is the true aspect of your life. The Gohonzon, which is, you just called the guys talking about the piece of paper, is the true aspect of your life. But you're not going to perceive that when you first start practicing.
Yeah.
You're not going to perceive that for a long time. Because you probably will not make the efforts to know enough to be able to perceive it for a long time. You'll be getting benefits. You'll be praying to the box. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Get me out of this. Make this happen. And in that process, you're incrementally developing your confidence in the power of that prayer. But it's only through a process of engagement that you discover that the actual source of that power of that prayer was you. It wasn't the piece of paper. Well, now that makes sense. Because I can understand how I have power, but it's very difficult for me to understand how a piece of paper has power. Okay? Well, it's because the piece of paper is a piece of paper until it comes into contact with my life. Then it's no longer a piece of paper. That's why it has power. You follow? But who understands that? It's not easy. And it's not something that happens in the beginning of your practice. Okay? That's why we all have teachers. He already said that in here. That we all attain Buddhahood through a process of hearing, of learning. It's not something that comes from, like, I'm so freaking smart. Okay? Right. So, he says, needless to say, going on page 195, you can again see we go through this book very slowly. Needless to say, Nichiren Buddhism is the great teaching for the limitless span of the latter day of the law. Because how long does the latter day of the law go for?
Forever.
It goes from the end of the middle day, which is 2,000 years after Shakyamuni's death, for 10,000 years and beyond. Okay? So we go from 1,000, 1,000, 10,000 and beyond. Okay? So needless to say, Nichiren Buddhism is the great teaching for the limitless span of the latter day of the law. It is the source of light illuminating all humankind throughout the eternal future. Okay? Now he's making a declarative statement there. It is the source of light illuminating all humankind throughout the eternal future. The length of time during which it will be effective is infinite. Okay? So this never changes. I also employ different expedient means to preach the subtle and wonderful law. He's again quoting the 16th chapter of the Lotus Sutra. Thus causing living beings to awaken joyful minds. And he qualifies now here that this indicates none other than expounding the law of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, not the provisional teachings, not anything to do with the Buddhism of harvest, of Shakyamuni's teachings, at all. Okay? Because it's qualified in the Lotus Sutra that the Lotus Sutra isn't Shakyamuni's. It's not possessive. Okay? It's a teaching that all Buddhists teach. All right? And causing people to experience great joy through the power of the Gohonzon by discovering the power of their own life. Because that's ultimately what happens when they develop this relationship with the Gohonzon. They discover the power of their own life because that is what they are experiencing, even though they may not perceive it as such in the beginning. You follow?
Yes.
All right, so those who earnestly embrace the mystic law will certainly never become miserable. This is truly, absolutely beyond any doubt. President Toda went so far as to say that unless great joy wells forth when praying to the Gohonzon, then one's faith is not correct. Wow. He kind of like hides behind the cloud of President Toda. He says, I'm not saying this, but boy, my mentor used to say that if you didn't feel great joy when you chanted, you're really not chanting right. You're not chanting with the correct understanding or with the correct spirit. He says, when we experience such joy, which is the same thing as saying, when we chant correctly, a great flower of benefit blossoms in our lives. Okay? By qualifying it that when we experience such joy, by what he said in the preceding sentence, he's saying when we chant correctly, the great flower of benefit blossoms in our lives. Okay? So this is what he's trying to explain is why do some people get so much benefit and they don't have to seem to chant so much, and some people chant and they don't get any benefit? It's because of the person. It's not because of the Gohonzon or the power of the Gohonzon or the power of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. It's the individual. The person that's not getting benefit is probably not chanting and experiencing joy when they practice. They probably already have a lot of things going on in their head that are precluding them from experiencing the flowing of the benefit that's available to them, but they have to incrementally change their fundamental nature for that to be able to, that dam to be burst for them. Do you understand? You've experienced this yourself. I've watched you. The more you clearly understand what you're doing, the more you're engaged and happy with the result, and the more you're willing to take on challenges without feeling frustrated or confused. Right? It's exactly what he's talking about. But he qualified this. So President Toda qualified this, saying, however, if knowing this, you simply try to will yourself to be joyful. In other words, if you think, again, this is all a little head thing. If you think what I just said is, if you don't feel joy when you're chanting, then you're probably not. Then you're not practicing correctly. You're not chanting correctly. You're not chanting with the correct attitude. He says, if you heard me say that now, and now you try and contrive that circumstance by saying, "Oh, I'm supposed to feel joyful, so I'll focus now on chanting with a sense of joy in my life." So that's bullshit. Okay. Right? You can't when you're feeling whatever you're feeling, it's still the 10th world. Okay? You can feel joy in the midst of many challenges and even what would otherwise be suffering. But when you perceive it correctly, it's not suffering. It's the way it is. I'm the Buddha. Of course I'm going to have to experience trials, tribulations, because I kick their ass, because that's what I do. I'm here to display the power of the law. I'm here to be the Buddha. Okay? So bring this shit on, because I'm going to kick its ass. It doesn't bum me out. Get it? All right. So he says, however, if knowing this you simply try to will yourself to be joyful, you won't experience true joy. If during your daily chanting your legs get numb and you find yourself thinking, I can't wait until this is over, oops, no, I have to be joyful, then you are not experiencing real joy. You're not understanding what he's talking about here. Okay? Faith is taking spirited action. Is that underlined in orange? Yes. Why? Because that's the whole ball game. This isn't about mental masturbation. This is about being inspired to be a different person. This is to be inspired to actually bring forth that Buddhahood. So that we're not talking about something theoretical. We're talking about something that is actualized by who you are, what you do. What extent you're willing to extend yourself to create the capacity within yourself to do and be that. It's action, 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 action. So faith isn't a passive thing. Faith isn't something like, I just believe. Because if you really believe, then you must act. Because if you believe, then you better be doing what you say you believe. Right? If you really believe it, but you're not doing it, then you really don't believe it. It's all it's boilerplate. It's happy talk. It's what we say at meetings. It's not how we live our lives. It's not who we are. Okay? That's the difference. That's the difference. That's what Daisaku Ikeda is trying to get everybody over the hump with these writings, is to qualify these nuanced issues you do not get at a Soka Gakkai meeting. This is way too deep to even begin to touch at a Soka Gakkai meeting. So who will find this out? Only those people taking spirited action to endeavor to find this out, because they have a seeking spirit to do so. And only those people that do it for the sake of not just themselves, but for others, will derive the benefit that's available in taking that action. Do you understand? So this isn't about becoming the smartest guy in the room. There's no merit in that. Unless you're sharing, the only merit in that is that you can share it with other people. Then there's all kinds of merit in it. But it's a different thing. It's a different reason. What?
Like me.
Like you. Like my little Scotty Woody. Faith is taking spirited action when we do so earnestly. What's earnestly mean? Sincerely. With a sincere spirit. Not for the sake of embellishing our perception of, amongst others. We don't give a shit what other people think about us. Because as the Buddha, we're going to be slandered, period. So anticipate it. Don't worry. I can't control what other people think about me. I can only control what I'm endeavoring to do with my life and the purpose for which I'm doing, why I'm doing that. Okay? That's what I can control. People slandered Daisaku Ikeda, they slandered Nietzsche, and they slandered Shakyamuni. Don't worry about what other people say. When we do so earnestly, our hearts become light and filled with momentum. Pessimism is alien to Buddhism. Taking action on the side of justice brings joy. Let us cheerfully, joyfully, and brightly advance along the path of our convictions. Now, normally we would limit this to time because I'm going to be gone. I'm going to read another 3 pages and try and make it less than an hour and get through chapter 15 tonight so that we start next week with chapter 16. This is at the page 196. Again, from the Jigage, or not from the Jigage, from the Juryo chapter. It says, Shozen nanshi nyorai kinsho shujo gyo o shobo takohako jusha I ze nin setsu ga sho shuke toku anokotara samyaku sambo dainin jitsu jobutsu irai kuan yakushitani hobenkyo ke shujo ronyu butsugo sanyo ze setsu. So that was the Romaji. What that translates to in English is, good men, the thus come one observes how among living beings there are those who delight in lesser teachings, meager in virtue, and heavy with defilement. For such persons I describe how in my youth I left my household and attained supreme perfect enlightenment, but in truth the time since I attained Buddhahood is extremely long, as I have told you. It is simply that I use this expedient means to teach and convert living beings and cause them to enter the Buddha way. That is why I speak in this manner. Going on to the text from Daisaku Ikeda. The lives of those who advance toward great ideals and dedicate themselves to continuous self-improvement are always pervaded with hope, fulfillment, and inspiration. Now, what he just did in that sentence, though, is he just described the state of Buddhahood. Because someone that attains the state of Buddhahood will always advance toward great ideals and dedicate themselves to continuous self-improvement. And because of that, they will always be pervaded with hope. There's no such thing as a Buddha that's not pervaded with hope. They'll always be fulfilled because that's the power of their life. And they will also always inspire others because that's their job. That's what they do for a living. Do you follow? Mm-hmm. So he didn't say it there, but that's what he just said. Mm-hmm. All right? That's a Buddha. They possess a brilliance of life that overflows from within and a kind of charm that words cannot express. Mm-hmm. All right? The Lotus Sutra urges all people to proceed along the path of continuous advancement. Because that's what Buddhahood is. That's what the Lotus Sutra urges you to do, right? Aim to realize the great state of life in the Buddha. Cultivate the boundless universe within your heart. The Lotus Sutra expounds this supreme path. To teach the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha first set forth various expedient teachings as a means to guide people. We call these the provisional teachings, right? Although Shakyamuni in the earlier sutras, which I'm referring to when I say provisional teachings, and in the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra, taught that he had renounced secular life at a young age and attained supreme perfect enlightenment for the first time in his present existence. This was an expedient teaching. What does that mean? It wasn't really the truth. Mm-hmm. Okay? It was a way to get people to understand the truth. Mm-hmm. All right? It's not the truth, though. It's a means to get to the truth. It was an expedient he expounded according to the understanding of those who delight in lesser teachings, meager in virtue and heavy with defilement. So he says, okay, because you're former middle day of the kind of people, I got to try and bring you along, because what does his teaching of the harvest actually do? It only advances people to the teaching of the sowing, to the Buddhism of the sowing. Mm-hmm. All right? So, he says, those who delight in lesser teachings indicates persons who embrace the Hinayana or provisional Mahayana teachings, or more broadly, an inferior system of values or sense of purpose in life. As a result, they do not aspire to attain the great state of life of the Buddha, because they don't even perceive that it's possible to them. That's something that will happen in a future lifetime. That's what all the provisional teachings say, right? Regardless, such people, Tentai says, their hearts are tainted with worldly pleasures and attached to erroneous views, and they desire to turn their bodies to ashes and annihilate their consciousness. That's attaining nirvana according to Hinayana teachings. All right? This reduced, turn body to ashes and annihilate their consciousness. All right? He says, meager in virtue and heavy with defilement means that such people have accumulated few causes. They have accumulated, karmically, they have accumulated few causes for attaining Buddhahood. Okay? Which means they have attained few causes for encountering the Gohonzon. Do you follow?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
All right? Their lives are defiled with earthly desires. Now, what does he mean by defiled, though? Does this mean earthly desires? Okay, earthly desires are bad. If their lives are defiled with earthly desires, what does that mean? Does that mean earthly desires are bad? Defilement indicates vices including greed, anger, foolishness, arrogance, doubt, mistaken views, and jealousies. Rather than trying to teach such persons about the eternal life of the Buddha, who has been enlightened since numberless major world system dust particle kalpas ago, Shakyamuni told them that he attained enlightenment for the first time in this lifetime as a result of having carried out various practices in previous existences. That's all of the provisional teachings, the Buddhism of the harvest. By so doing, ultimately he was laying the groundwork for the revelation of the Buddha's eternal lifespan, that is, his attainment of enlightenment in the remote past, here in the lifespan chapter. So before he dies, he takes those expedient means for the people of the former and middle of the day of the law, and he clarifies into the actual truth of the Lotus Sutra, of the eternity of life, of the Buddha nature exists in all people, of the law. But he never qualifies what the law is, or he never qualifies how to practice that law in order to attain this state. Okay? He just says, this is the truth, I just haven't ever told you the truth. But he never really explains the truth. Why? Because it's not his truth to explain. He's not the original Buddha. Mm-hmm. Nichiren is. Mm-hmm. Okay? Nichiren's got to come to teach his law of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. That's why Shakyamuni wasn't the one to do that. That's why Tentai wasn't the one to do that. That's why Dingyo wasn't the one to do that. They all laid down doctrine that Nichiren would then use to plant his feet in, so it wouldn't take 2 lifetimes to reveal his teaching. He could predicate it on things that were already agreed to and assimilated as being fundamental doctrines of Buddhism, and then qualify and clarify them. This never said this. Show me where it said that. It doesn't say that anywhere. It says this. And it says this. And now that it's the latter day of the law, it said this would happen in the latter day. That's what I'm doing. Okay, I'm not even making this up as I go along. Everything that I'm doing was already prophesied by previously in the Lotus Sutra, and then qualified by Tentai and Dingyo in their interpretations of the Lotus Sutra. Okay, so he's saying, had he taught about the eternal Buddha from the outset without employing such expedients, many would doubtless have slandered him, saying, "Who could believe this grandiose talk?" Or they might have given up hope entirely, convinced that they could not possibly attain such a great state of life. Either way, it would have led them to abandon their practice. Okay? Because they're not bodhisattvas. They're not the original disciples. They haven't awakened their Buddha nature. Okay? Because he started out by expounding the cause of his past practice and effect of his attaining Buddhahood for the first time in this present life, people could accept what he said and therefore strive to attain their own enlightenment. I'll read it again. Because he started out by expounding the cause of his past practice and effect of his attaining Buddhahood for the first time in his present life, people could accept what he said and therefore strive to attain their own enlightenment. Moreover, with his teaching about the 3 vehicles being replaced by the 1 vehicle in expedient means, as I just qualified, that's right, Shakyamuni had indicated that all people inherently possess the world of Buddhahood. Inherently possess. It's not something that is acquired. It's not something that is attained. It's something that already exists. He unequivocally declared that thus come ones have only the single Buddha vehicle that they employ in order to preach the law to living beings. They do not have any other vehicle, a second one or a third one. He says this in the Lotus Sutra, right? I think in chapter 4, in chapter 3, or maybe it's in chapter 2, I don't know. Because this foundation had already been laid, the disciples who in the lifespan chapter caught a glimpse of their mentor state of life, vast and boundless as the universe, rather than being plagued by doubt, they could believe in the teaching of his attainment of Buddhahood in the remote past with a sense of excitement and joy, because he then made prophecies that they were also going to attain enlightenment in future life, in future existences. That's what's in the Lotus Sutra. That's what the first chapters consist of. Prophecies of enlightenment towards the followers, the people that are attending that ceremony. You're aware of that? You knew that? Okay. So he says, it might be said that Shakyamuni preaching of his initial attainment of enlightenment in this lifetime was part of a grand curriculum that the Buddha had conceived out of his profound determination not to allow even one person to regress in faith or fall away from the path to enlightenment. Such was the profound thought and tenacious effort required to enable people to believe in the eternal life of the Buddha. Outside of Buddhism as well, the eternity of life is a subject that many philosophers and religious thinkers have dedicated their lives to understanding. Ultimately, however, their insights have either not transcended the realm of ideas or have remained a matter of personal awakening. As such, these insights could not be practically communicated to people at large. All this points to just how difficult it is to enable ordinary people, meager in virtue and heavy with defilement, to comprehend the vast life of the Buddha, which is without beginning or end. Herein lay the Buddha's heroic spiritual struggle. Now he's again trying to explain why Shakyamuni had to go through everything and did go through everything that he did in leaving the teaching of the Buddhism of the harvest when he himself knew that the Buddhism of the sowing was coming. All right? And that's what Daisaku Ikeda is putting forth here, a premise as to why this occurred. Logically, why this preceded the Buddhism of the sowing. Why the Buddhism of the harvest, which is actually a result, precedes the Buddhism of the sowing, which is the actual planting. Normally, planting precedes harvest, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not the way Buddhism is taught. Buddhism starts with Buddhism of the harvest, the result. It expresses the manifest result, then qualifies what was the source of that result. Because the source is not revealed until the latter day of the law. Mm-hmm. Do you follow? Mm-hmm. What is the source? Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Exactly what faith would bring you to. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. That doesn't exist as a teaching or even as a defined law prior to Nichiren. Okay? Actually, Tentai dabbles in some clarifications of the Dengyo, but they don't make any declarative teaching like Nichiren did. All right? So he says, those who believe in and practice, pardon me. All right. For the people of the latter day, Nichiren manifested the great life of the Buddha in the form of the Gohonzon. Therefore, for us, faith in the Gohonzon becomes the path to life's eternity. Through believing in the Gohonzon, exerting ourselves in doing Gongyo and chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, and dedicating our lives... I love you too, baby. You got to go to bed? Yeah. Okay, I love you. See you tomorrow. See you in a minute. I'll be back up in a minute. Through believing in the Gohonzon, exerting ourselves in doing Gongyo and chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo and dedicating our lives to Kosen Rufu, we can enter the path of eternal happiness of the Buddha. Now, what does that mean? Let's clarify that. He says, for the people of the latter day of the law. So now he's talking about us. He's not talking about the people that Shakyamuni was. Shakyamuni's audience is not us. Okay? That's really what you need to understand. So what Shakyamuni's talking about
is not important.
Is not important. Okay? Other than it underpins what the Daishonin said to provide credibility and doctrinal foundation to it. But it's not meant for us. It doesn't have any effect on us. Because in the latter day of the law, the power and efficacy of the Lotus Sutra as a 28-chapter teaching no longer exists. It's been diminished through distortion to the point that it no longer has the ability to redeem anybody and take them to Anattara Samyak Sampradaya. It doesn't introduce anybody to Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. In the absence of Nichiren's teaching, you don't find Nam-myoho Renge-kyo in the latter day of the law in the 28 chapters, right? So he says, for the people of the latter day, Nichiren manifested the great life of the Buddha, which is our original state, our original identity, in the form of the Gohonzon. That's why people can say the Gohonzon is you. Okay? Even though at the same time it's the life of the eternal Buddha, it's the life of the original Buddha. There's no separation between any of those things I just said. They are all the same thing. Therefore, for us, faith in the Gohonzon becomes the path to life's eternity. Why? Because faith in the Gohonzon is how we reveal and discover our own Buddha nature existing in reality, not theoretically. Actual Ichinen Sanzen comes from faith. Okay? And the path to life's eternity. Why? Because once we attain Buddhahood, we now enter the realm of birth and death in the realm of Buddhahood. We are guaranteed to always find the correct teacher, the correct teaching, the correct object of devotion. We attain Buddhahood in every lifetime once we attain that state. Okay? So that's eternal. That's the path to life's eternity that he's referring to. Always manifesting as the Buddha in each lifetime. Through believing in the Gohonzon, which is what you just said a minute ago, faith, right? Exerting ourselves in doing Gongyo and chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. What's that? Practice. Okay? And dedicating our lives to Kosen Rufu, which would have to involve study. We can enter the path, the eternal path of the path of eternal happiness of the Buddha. We can become the Buddha eternally. We can reveal the Buddha nature and have it revealed in each subsequent life without there ever being a diminishment. Those who believe in and practice the mystic law are not people meager in virtue and heavy with defilement. So when he was going back here and you're thinking about, I didn't change my underwear, or I had sex with somebody out of marriage, or I told my best friend's secrets, whatever. That has nothing to do with meager in virtue and heavy with defilement. That phrase has to do with slandering the law. It doesn't have to do with anything secular in terms of right and wrong. So when people put it down to everyday good and bad that's based on Judeo-Christianity, they got their heads completely up their ass as far as the teaching of Nichiren is concerned. It has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with that. Slander of the law, finished, that's the box we're talking about. Heavy, meager in virtue, heavy in defilement. Has nothing to do with secular right and wrong. That's the topsy-turvy thing that he talks about in that Gosho that I said I wanted to read to you someday. All right? They are people with great roots of goodness, no matter who they are. No matter who they are. They are not people meager in virtue or heavy with defilement. They are people with great roots of goodness. So if you don't perceive them as such, that isn't their problem. Do you follow what I'm saying? The point I'm making here? That's why it's a reflection. You never see somebody else's fundamental darkness. You only see your own. Okay?
I have a question. And
sure.
It's not directly connected to this, but we had a discussion in Germany about the bodhisattvas of the earth. And then, the bodhisattva of the earth, that they choose their karma.
Right. Gan Ken Go.
Yeah, into
deliberately deliberately creating the appropriate karmas.
Yeah, and then so the suffering the people, the bodhisattvas of the earth, they have is because they chose it. So then one member was asking, if I choose my suffering and then for my next lifetime I chose the same suffering, so I will suffer in my next lifetime as well. So
but see, again, the Buddha doesn't perceive what you're describing in that meeting as suffering. They don't even experience it as suffering. They don't even know what you're talking about. You're talking about a diluted state of things being inconvenient or uncomfortable, and that's not suffering. A Buddha doesn't give a shit about that. That's what they do. They eat that up and spit it out. Is that window open? Oh, okay, sorry. They eat that up and spit it out. So again, when you talk about it from that round table conversation, I don't know the different levels of faith or capacity, how much people would understand all this. But what you're saying right now already qualifies that the level of perception of the group is not being carried to a very deep fundamental level if that's the way the question's being asked, and then there was never a good definitive answer given. So when we talk about the spirit of Gan Ken Go, first of all, understand that the entire concept of Gan Ken Go is not a Buddhist concept. It is a Soka Gakkai concept. Okay? And it's extrapolated from the teachings of Nichiren because he refers to his fundamental issues that he had to deal with and qualifies that, yes, they're all because of slander. Every difficulty, everything in our lives, everything is a reflection of karma, and all the karma that we experience as suffering, quote-unquote suffering, the kind of imposition, starvation, cold, deprivation, all that kind of suffering, okay, is based on slander of the law. But a Buddha doesn't perceive or experience that. How many times does Nichiren in the Gosho say, the snow's falling through the roof, I've got nothing to eat, and I'm so happy, tears are rolling down my face. Nothing can diminish the great joy that I feel. Because he understands the truth, perceives his true identity, understands the nature and the true nature of life, that it's eternal, that whatever you're experiencing is very temporary, especially any suffering as a Buddha. Anything that's an inconvenience is overcome. You don't have any deadlocks that you don't overcome as a Buddha. You don't have any suffering that you dragged into your next lifetime if you were actually the Buddha. Maybe if somebody that's deluded thinking that the Buddha is an intellectual, theoretical thing. But actually, Ichinen Sanzen, there's no longer suffering involved in that association of that experience. Okay? And why do you experience that suffering? You don't experience that suffering just for the sake of wanting to suffer. you experience out of great, the concept behind Ganken no Go is your compassion for others is such that you want to be where they are so you can save them. But because you're the Buddha, you haven't made any cause that would equate to go into that kind of an environment. You know, you should be off in a Buddha land, right? You should be someplace that is reflective of the great good fortune. That's why the provisional teachings have Buddha lands, where nothing bad ever happens, and everybody just sits around and hangs. And they're all chilled out, and they're all happy, and they got musical instruments and all kinds of weird shit going on to entertain them. They don't deal with any kind of adversity. But then the Daishonin clarifies, that's all baloney. That doesn't really exist. That's an expedient means. That's for people that needed to hear that kind of thing to be able to continue. The truth of life is the Buddha always manifests in the Sahe world. Okay? The Buddha always manifests in the sea of suffering. Expressly. Why? Because of their compassion. Because of their desire to make others equal to themselves. Which means to make them free of the suffering thing, the word you're calling suffering. They know they may experience experientially, they may have the same environmental circumstance, but they won't experience it as suffering. It'll be the great joy of the law. It'll be the great joy of manifesting their persevering nature and their faith. They'll never, to give your life for the sake of the law. That means you could lose your life, potentially, as some circumstance. Okay? There's supposed to be no greater joy. So the two don't equate. It's not about lack of adversity is the good way, and suffering is some sort of a punishment. No. This teaching is to say what you experience in life that you view as suffering is delusion. It's your delusion that perceives that as a bad thing. And also why you experience it as a bad thing. You're not perceiving it correctly. You're perceiving it from a perspective of delusion. Like it's not supposed to occur, or you don't know what its true intent is. You're not good enough, or you're being punished. It's never like, I'm the strongest person on the planet, so I'm going to lift some 1,000-pound weights just to show how badass you can be when you work out. You know, that's what we do. We lead people through the example of our own lives. If we don't have anything in common with people that don't have the same fortune that we have, they will always separate themselves from us. How could I be, that's why the Buddha could never say he had an eternal life. That's why he had to use all those expedient means, make up all that stuff that wasn't real. Because he couldn't say it the way it was. People wouldn't be able to grasp it. They would just, yeah, right. Okay? So, does that answer your question? So the concept of Ganken no Go only occurs because you're a Buddha, number one. So if this person that's saying this, they don't perceive themselves already as the Buddha, they don't have to worry about the suffering in the next lifetime because they're not in line for it yet. Ganken no Go is only experienced by bodhisattvas of the earth. And only a whole life of devotion to the law qualifies you to actually be that. That's a nice big catchphrase for people that go to Soka Gakkai meetings. Got news for you. That's not the definition.
Yeah, it is a very good question because it also causes a lot of confusion in the local groups.
Oh, I'm sure it does. But again, you'd have to read you'd have to understand what the teaching is to be able to clarify it in any other way other than more confusion. Leaders giving answers where they really don't know what the goddamn answer is. Okay? That's the problem. People not having answers. That's why you do this. To give people answers. Why do I read this? To give answers. Not because I've got a question about it. Right? That's why you'll ultimately perceive it for. That's your function. If you are the Buddha, and this says you are, then that's what this is all about. You realizing that in a stage of 5-6 stages, and actualizing it as an in-game process that you couldn't possibly go. You don't start out at 6th stage. You go from First of all, encountering the Gohonzon, then a gradual process where eventually then you become devoted to the law. You're doing it for the sake of Kosen Rufu. You perceive your identity as a bodhisattva of the earth, but you still consider yourself a bodhisattva of the earth. There's still this Buddha that you're serving. Mm-hmm. Sixth is understand you are the Buddha that you're serving. You know, it's not something outside of you. It's not something different from you. It's nothing greater than you. Mm-hmm. All right? Mm-hmm. 3 more paragraphs and we'll be done for the evening. Thank you for your patience. He says, those who believe in and practice the mystic law are not people meager in virtue and heavy with defilement. They are people with great roots of goodness who enjoy a status second to none. All right? So he's not talking about you or me or any of us when he was referring to this in the Lotus Sutra. This is truly an age that abounds with people meager in virtue and heavy with defilement who delight in lesser teachings. It is regarded as natural to lead an inferior way of life dedicated only to the pursuit of pleasure or wealth. That is the norm. We may be living in an age devoid of values when people simply find it extremely difficult to uphold great ideals. In the very midst of this modern society, and that's what President Ikeda is saying, he said, don't be like that. You know, if you consider yourself to be my disciple, if you're a disciple of Daisaku Ikeda, I want you to be like I strive to be. All right, which is to go against the grain. In the very midst of this modern society, we are studying, believing in, and practicing the great philosophy of the supreme law. With our gaze on eternity, we are taking action to lead all humanity to enlightenment as Buddhas. No other way of life is as noble or replete with good fortune as that of being the Buddha. For precisely this reason, it is only natural that we should be envied. Mm-hmm. So expect people to attack you, be jealous of you, not like you, even though you didn't really do anything to deserve that, quote unquote, in your mind. Okay? No matter how unfair that seems, it's totally natural. They will be envied. It would be actually quite strange if we did not encounter misunderstanding, prejudice, or a certain amount of persecution. It goes with it. It's not suffering. Let us advance with dignity. Let us continue working with confidence and still greater joy to cultivate the hearts of others. Regard the significance of good men that thus come one observes how among living beings. Tentai explains that it refers to Shakyamuni's determined and all-out struggle like a bounding lion to benefit the people of his day, which is not the people of our day, because we're in the latter day of the law. He was the former day of the law. Tentai was the middle day of the law. All right? This sutra passage describes the Buddha's intensive struggle to lead the people to enlightenment, to practice for Kosen Rufu with this same dedication and resolve is to read this passage with one's life. That's what I endeavor to do. That's what I encourage you to do. That's what President Ikeda is encouraging me to do. That's what the teaching of Nichiren is all about. End of page 201. We'll start on page 203 on Wednesday. Or, pardon me, a week from Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.